look, people bring up every year around April, oh, the Chargers are going to be a team to watch out for this season. And then they have like 5 guys on IR by the time the season starts. They can't quite get it done. I think this year, even if they're healthy, they're not a threat for the division crown. And I know we'll talk about them maybe being a wild card team here in a second. I guess we can just start with them. First year head coach and Brandon Staley. They have a really talented receiving core. They lost Hunter Henry. Now they have Jared Cook, Mike Williams, Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen, Chris Harris, Derwin James, Nasir Adderley. They added Asante Samuel Jr., I believe, in the draft, which is really nice. Um, it's going to come down to the leaps and bounds that Herbert makes, I think, and then also how healthy they can be. Sam, what do you kind of make of the Chargers?
I think they are at least a bubble team for the playoffs, personally. I think Justin Herbert is fantastic. I think he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. Uh, if he's not that this year, that's going to be really disappointing. But last year, I thought he was a top 10 quarterback, and I think he's going to continue that. I like the receiving core. Receiving core is good. The thing that they did best over this offseason was, of course, offensive line. They fixed their offensive line, seemingly, at least, with the additions of Rashawn Slater and Corey Linsley. That is massive. They got their left tackle of the future in the first round of the draft, and they got who I'd argue is the best center in the NFL, at least last year with the Packers. Corey Linsley was fantastic in front of Aaron Rodgers. So Slater, Linsley, you hope Bulaga gets back to his Green Bay uh, tenure if you're a Chargers fan. Matt Filer, who came from Pittsburgh, they have an offensive line now, which they didn't have in the entire tenure of Phillip Rivers, pretty much. This is like the best offensive line the Chargers have had in about 2 decades. And then the defense, of course, you got Bosa still. You have Jerry Tillery, who's very interesting. Linval Joseph, Kenneth Murray, and Kaiser White. They're still looking. Andrew Tranquil for their linebackers, all young linebackers. They're hoping that translate. And then, of course, DB Chris Harris Jr., Derwin, if he's healthy, which we'll see. Nasir Adderley is always interesting. Hasn't quite lived up to the hype that I thought he would reach. Although Tillery, same thing. Neither of those guys have been quite as good as I thought they'd be, but they still got some time. They're still young. And then Asante Samuel Jr. will be a very interesting player to watch this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've caught some heat for my takes on Justin Herbert this season. I love Justin Herbert. I think he's a great quarterback. He's going to be a great quarterback for a long time. But I think he might regress a little bit this year. And that doesn't make a ton of sense because they have a better team around him. He's protected. He was pressured 217 times last year. Like that was the most by rookie in 12 seasons. It was really, really bad. But I think part of that is he was so good playing out of structure that now that he has to understand the offense a little bit better, this is going to prove like the work he's been putting in the offseason, his processing ability. He didn't kind of graduate from each read as quickly as I wanted him to last season. Like you watch him in college and there was kind of that Dr. or the Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing with him, where some games he'd look really, really good and he'd be making all the out of structure plays. Some games he would look like a guy who hasn't played quarterback very long. And last season, he just looked good. Like all year, he was fantastic. But I'm interested to see, and it could totally unfold where he makes a huge leap and cements his status as a top 10 quarterback. But also, I'm really, I guess, cautiously optimistic could be the way to put it about them. I think that either way, they're going to be a tough out. Like it's a team that's going to win 9 or 10 games. I think they're going to challenge for a playoff spot. They're not going to be close enough to make the Chiefs sweat. Like they could beat the Chiefs twice this season, and I still don't think they'd win the division. It's just a clear gap still between the Chiefs and the AFC West. But the Chargers are probably the most interesting team, I think, in that division.
Yeah, something you mentioned with Justin Herbert, it is interesting with the pressure thing. Justin Herbert could definitely regress based off of what he did under pressure and when kept clean. For PFF, he was the number 1 quarterback in the NFL when under pressure. He was spectacular under pressure. And when kept clean, he was their 22nd graded quarterback. So if he continues that kept clean grading and regresses under pressure, that would make sense because kept clean is traditionally more stable than when under pressure in terms of stats and everything. Your under pressure stats can vary 1 year. There's instances of guys being elite 1 year under pressure and horrendous the next year under pressure. So we could see it. Whereas kept clean, much more consistently telling of the story. So if Herbert sticks around where he was last year when kept clean, then I agree that he'll be regressing most likely.